Hey, Alan, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, first of all, Brian. I do appreciate it. And I am a fan of the content. So much appreciate the time. So in terms of my background, I've been in sales pretty much all my life. Started in a company called Pitney Bowes. You may have heard of it. Had some really, really good training there, selling a small little franking machine at that time. Very old school, if I can use the term, 100, $150 a day. There wasn't really much tech. There wasn't really much enablement. It was more a case of, here's your list, here's your phone, make some sales. So I still think that was a really good training ground. Built myself up from there, and then felt the curiosity to move into more of a consultative type sale. So at that time, there was a dot-com boom. I then moved into telecommunications, where I was selling more internet service providing type services to businesses. And then, interesting enough, and maybe you want to unpack this a bit more, decided that I wanted to leave sales. So I was doing really well. You could class me as somebody who was performing, hitting targets, making quite good income as a result. And they decided just to quit and then go back and study traditional Chinese medicine for 4 years.
Wow, that's a switch.
Yeah, that is a big switch, and you could call that maybe a completely U-turn to where I was going. And there's a story behind that, as with all things. But then I got back into the workforce, actually starting as an SDR. So I felt like when I was studying, I was in a bit of a time capsule, similar to maybe Captain America. You come out and it's a completely
You're
different
frozen
world,
for 30
and,
years. Yeah.
and exactly a different environment. And tech had really changed. Things were more accessible. Cultures were more open and transparent. And I came from quite a corporate background, so that was a bit of a shock to the system, to be honest. And then from being an SDR, built myself back up, and you know I was a sales rep, and then started rejoined my career as a SDR, which, as you can imagine, is quite difficult. You imagine doing 360, and then you're just at the tip end of the spear booking appointments again. But I still think that was a very good learning experience for me. But then now in my current role, I currently head up a commercial team within EMEA for a company called PatSnap.
Yeah. Well, what was behind that switch? Was it something you'd always wanted to study? Was it a epiphany, a life condition? What was the cause for it?
Yeah, so I'm quite heavily involved in martial arts. And I think I was at that point where, in all honesty, I was a little bit obsessive in my earlier days in sales, probably influenced by things like Wall Street. It's all about the grind and how much you can push yourself. And I had that moment where I was looking around thinking, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And I always wanted to combine something in terms of like, and it's interesting how it's quite a big topic at the moment, mental well-being or well-being. And with the martial arts and the philosophy, I decided probably with the burnout, I needed some time out. Only to realize, honest, when I returned to the workforce, and I did attempt to have my own alternative medicine clinic, which I'm happy to be upfront and say, from a business standpoint, I failed. Not from a life standpoint, because I think I learned a lot there. But and then I realized what I was good at, and I'm actually very grateful for the experience, because my mindset, and this is where I'm very big on sort of mindset and thinking, how I approach, how I restarted my sales career completely changed in terms of my thinking.
Well, let's dig into that, because I think martial arts and sales has a lot more in common than people would normally think. And I don't
Sure,
mean the combat side of it. I mean the practice
sure.
of it. Is it so repetitive and looking for tiny little distinctions to make it better? Is that
Absolutely.
accurate? Yeah.
I would say there's a quote from Bruce Lee, who you're probably quite
Yep.
familiar with. I don't fear the person that knows 1,000 techniques. I fear the person that's practiced one technique 1,000 times.
Yeah. Because I remember doing it and it was like over and over. And you're like, come on, it was pretty close, wasn't it? But no, it's like, and those distinctions in sales, a lot of people don't value, but they're critical.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like you're definitely speaking my language. I would say like I can't be conclusive because I can only go by my experience, but I think the basics and the repetitions and the habits are something that we sometimes overlook in sales to this day. I think that's my opinion.
Yes, because I see it all the time on LinkedIn and people sending me notes. Oh, the presentation was perfect. The demo was perfect, but we didn't get the deal, and my manager was mad at me. And it's like, well, the objective is to get the deal, right? And how
Yes,
well you do at the other things is an element, but not the whole thing.
completely agree.
So go into the going back to the SDR process. Now, was that humbling or was it educational? Was it?
I think it was both. So humbling in a sense that imagine you had been doing 360 sales for like 5, 6 years, and you move into a role, and it's a great role, but not necessarily for somebody who had been selling for 5, 6 years. It's a different experience, right? And I'm a big advocate of the SDR world. I have a lot of passion for that, and I know it's a big duty to raise, let's just say, young professionals who are starting off in sales. But from my standpoint, that was very humbling because as an SDR, and this is going out to a lot of SDRs, it's very interesting when you have to sometimes work with other salespeople. Um, when you're an SDR, it's not easy. You're doing a lot of the groundwork, a lot of research, a lot of cold calling, a lot of cold outreach. And I was just stuck at that when I was quite experienced previously as a top seller doing everything. So I think psychologically it did have a bit of an impact. So that was definitely a learning experience. But in terms of do I regret it? No, because I think what I also learned, going back to the Captain America analogy, a lot of things have moved on in sales. There was a lot more of a tech stack available. You weren't looking through books this time. You actually, you had your Zoom info, you had your Lucia's, you had Salesforce. Back in those days, it was goldmine, if you remember.
Yep.
So that had changed. But also, I think the biggest learning for me was how from a corporate environment that I was quite in, it was quite regimented. It was very much hierarchy. I do believe, like, especially within SaaS, which is why I play, it's less about hierarchy, more about networks. It's more about, openness and transparency. And those things were a big shock to me. Like, for example, my first day when I started in that company, I had to hit a gong and introduce myself. And if you had asked me to do that like 5 years previous, I would have thought, like, what is going on here? Why am I hitting a gong? It's a different type of culture. So I'd say from those learnings, I kind of learned quite quick how to adapt, and really interesting to see how technology as well as cultures within those businesses has evolved a lot from what I was used to.
And did you like it, or you had no choice, I guess? But did you? How long did it take you to
Well,
adjust to it?
if you watch if you watch the Avengers, I think Captain America spent a lot of time underground just punching a bag. But I think I did learn to really appreciate it, and I definitely do appreciate it now because it is the way moving forward. I'm definitely a fan of openness, transparency, the growth mindset. Not being afraid to fail and thinking more about experimenting rather than just pure planning.
Yeah.
So definitely yes.
And how long did it take you to get back your groove where you started to feel like, was it the SDR role or was it the AE role after that? Or
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when I think about it, the data on my LinkedIn actually shows it. 3 years, because if you look at my LinkedIn, I was an SDR for 3 years in three different companies. I think that was a 3 year period, which it took that time for me to really understand what it is in terms of SaaS and tech moving forward, but also like where I would be best suited in terms of where I thought I could play best.
yeah. And what was your motivation to get into leadership?
So it was more organic. I think for me, it was not really a case of, oh, I want to become a manager. But I think what did it for me was, I think just to share a bit of my background. So I'm actually also not as active now, but at that time, I was very active as a martial arts instructor. So, of course, when you're a teacher, there is an element of training and coaching. And I always when I started to do quite well, when I found my mojo back again, I would have a lot of people ask me questions like, Alan, how do you do this? How do you do that? And how come you know how to do this? And why is it so difficult for us? And I actually enjoyed that element. And business sort of backed me. And then, I moved into a leadership role, and I just thought there's just so much more fulfillment. And I think maybe it's different for other people, but I think for me anyway, when I got to a certain age, I started to get more fulfillment from being less selfish and seeing others do better. So that's when I realized, well, yes, we've got to make a number, but if my number comes through making people better, which is really what leadership is,
Yep.
then that's not a bad place to be.
So how did you handle those requests? Why is it so hard for me? Because that's what they're saying when they come to you. It's like, you seem to get this. I don't seem to get the same result, yet I'm doing the same thing. How did you help them through that?
So that's a really good question. I guess that's also from my standpoint, how I developed myself. I think a lot of things come through self-awareness to start with. Some people might think they're doing the right things and putting themselves into the right activity, but actually when you unpack it through a combination of understanding the actual task they're doing versus the data to back that up, it doesn't always reflect what they think. That's the first thing, because it's not easy to look in the mirror, and especially, well, you can look in the mirror and you can have your eyes closed too, because I think that opening up the eyes was a big part. And then after that, it was more about getting their mindset right, making sure they were coachable to then build a plan and put certain tasks and actions and habits into effect. And I think it really depends. There's two parts to this. I think I also enjoyed, I guess this was my martial arts influence. Sometimes the sales rep that you're working with has to, number one, sit in action as well. Because as a martial arts instructor, we have a saying like, if you can't do it, then don't try to teach it.
Right.
That's a simple thing. I know that's a bit black and white, but that's just my view. And the other side of it is they need to also feel you going on that journey with them. So yes, I can do it, but doesn't mean that person can then do it. But then slowly you can inject yourself and remove yourself at the same time, almost like a pair of stabilizers on the bike.
Yeah. And how about the
Yeah.
coachability part of it? Is it something that, let's say they're not coachable? Have you ever found a way to turn that around?
Yes, and I think every sales leader has probably experienced more than one or two reps that are not coachable in their time. So do I believe everybody is coachable? I do, to a degree. I think some people are more naturally coachable, and there's the other side of the coin where you deal with a very coachable rep that just can't produce,
Yeah.
even with the best amount of coaching. It works both ways. But I think again, going back to that self-awareness, I think trying to also educate them around how to approach learning, the growth mindset, and also like taking them maybe from, if they're in a, normally sometimes when people need coaching, let's just say it's a struggling rep, they're in that sort of bad mental state.
Yeah.
It's all about trying to correct that through the right behaviors. So I think, to answer your question, yes, I have, but I think everybody is coachable. But what is also difficult, so there's being coachable, and there's also having the courage to actually make changes.
Yeah.
Because how many people, Brian, do you know maybe, or you experience in life, that know what to do but don't have the courage to do it?
Most of us.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, because I always bring it back to like dieting, right?
Sure.
There's millions of diet books every year, and it all comes
Yeah.
down to eating less, moving more.
Hmm.
And everyone's trying to
So
find some little hack that's where I don't have to move as much and I can eat more. It's and selling's a lot like that. There's the actions, but there's also that mindset of like empathy,
yeah.
because it's so much about, and martial arts is about, what's the opponent going to do? Where's the
Hmm.
weakness? And sales, it's about, what do they care about? How do I get them talking?
Sure.
Because if you can get them talking and guide them to what you care about and they care about, you've got the beginnings of a great sale.
Absolutely. And there's the other part where you do have to be able to do things in real time with the IQ, the EQ, and what I like to call the street smartness. You can get in a ring, but when you get hit, that could change your whole perspective, just like being
Yes.
on any call.
Yeah, yeah, because and that's why I believe in martial arts, the repetitions is so critical. What they want is your subconscious mind to have it as a habit so that your prefrontal
Sure.
cortex doesn't have to think about it. It becomes instinct instead of execution.
Absolutely. And it's always easier to see from afar people doing it than you doing it yourself.
Yes. Yeah, because like I'm a big time runner, and every time I try and get to the next level, I know I'm there when I stop thinking about how much pain I'm in. It's like
Yeah,
when you can drift away and listen to a podcast or some music, and all of a sudden, what? There goes another mile, and I didn't even notice.
absolutely.
What are some of the critical things that you've seen in early stage reps that are struggling, that if they only tweaked this one thing or a couple of things would really take their game to another level?
Hmm. So I think when it like we have new starters joining, I think what one part of this might be a bit of a general way of answering, but I think sometimes when people join an organization, just take a new starter example, it's there's so much going on. I think just that skill set to really prioritize the key things that you need to do. Like often when a new starter might join a company, they need to learn about the product, they need to learn about, how to do a demo in our case. But actually, equally important, there's a number coming around the corner. They should be learning about the skills to build pipeline. So that's one thing. But then how do you actually even get to building pipeline? You sometimes need to go back to basics. And I see this a lot. Sometimes you have account executives that will join an organization, but they underestimate the amount of SDR work that is also still needed to do at the beginning.
Yeah. and and that's it. And they've got to kind of own that, and not blame other things for being in the way.
Yes, and I think that's one of the. I mean, I love your view on accountability as a quality, and I think that's true because if the blame game is probably the easiest one to play, but the hardest one to win.
Yeah, you never win it.
Yeah,
You just
exactly.
feel like you're winning it until you found out you lose it.
Yeah, I agree. So it's really putting your efforts into those areas that are slightly uncomfortable, that requires hard work, because everybody wants to do smart work, and I agree with that. Um, but even when you have smart work, you have to work hard at it as well.
Right. Yeah. It's just doing it smarter, but you still have to do it. That's the
There's the doing part,
you still
exactly.
have
Yes.
to do it. Even when you become great at it, you still have to do it.
I think when you become great at it, you have to do it even more. That's the thing.
And what are some of advanced skills that you see great reps have that okay reps are struggling with?
I think it, for me, I think what I see quite often on a week to week basis is really trying to decipher what's actually happening within the sales cycle, really tuning in to understand the sale. And that's a hard skill sometimes to teach because with emotional intelligence, you might have a prospect say to you yes, but they don't actually mean yes.
Right.
They might say to you no, they might not actually mean no. How do you really tell where the truth is in the sale? I think that's something that I see a lot of advanced or the most successful salespeople do, and that's a hard thing to train. I
It's
think,
very hard to
um,
train. Yeah.
yeah, I think it requires emotional intelligence. You have to have a certain level of competency as well, but then you wrap all that up, and then you've also got to apply it into real time. So, and that self-reflection, I'm a big believer in like listening to gong calls, making sure that if you take the martial arts side of it, you could be a top fighter. And let's not make it too much about combat because that might sound quite violent to the viewers, but you still have to work on the specifics, and you still need to recognize areas where you might be going wrong, that unfortunately when you are performing, you might be in that unconsciously competent zone, which is also quite a dangerous zone to be in
Yes.
because you don't know when you might fail. And like boxing, you drop your guard once, you might be a world champion, but if you drop your guard, it could be the end of the fight.
Have you come up with any exercises or techniques to be able to judge those deals, to determine where the deal is? Because
Yeah, that's a
because
that's
yes doesn't mean yes, we're buying. It means yes to my opinion on the question when you're selling to a company.
Yeah, so there's different ways to try and decipher. That's a hard one. That's like almost having the blue pill, I guess, in the matrix, isn't it? The ultimate answer. But I think ways in which you can sort of measure is like engagement levels. How much commitment, how much momentum do you actually have in the sell? Are you asking those key questions to validate, early on and throughout? And also you're doing the right type of discovery. I think a lot of reps think discovery is just the early part you do. No, you discovering throughout the whole
Yes.
demonstration, having very much a clear, call it a closing plan, a project plan, or whatever, some sort of plan where you know everything you need to know. And I think that that would depend on the type of sell that you have. Every business is different. There's different ways, like you can, your medics and your med picks and your spins, but ultimately really understanding what is needed for your sales cycle, and then having those tick box and understanding how to move through those gates. Now, that's going to be different. So I can't be specific, but in our case, for example, our sales motion is quite high velocity. So it's really about understanding, the champion, testing your champion, validating, really knowing if they're a real champion, but then also understanding the what I've learned as well is when you're selling to a company, they don't even know their own buying process sometimes. So you need to even educate them on their own buying process. And so much is in the mix here, and then so many different stakeholders. So I think salespeople sometimes get overwhelmed and
Yes.
just believe they're running a sales cycle, but actually haven't really unpacked all the areas that they need to be focusing on. So it's that self-awareness, I think, Brian.
Yeah, because in martial arts, you're trying to anticipate how the other person is either going to attack you or defend against you. And you've got to kind of
Yes,
visualize that.
sure.
And I think it takes a lot of judgment and experience to be able to do that with a deal.
Agreed. And just like a human being, the deal is constantly moving and evolving in different
Yes.
ways.
And
Yeah.
like interviewing a rep, you've got to kind of, in your mind at least, judge how much of it is accurate, what they're saying, and real. And that
Yes.
real meaning this is the way they're going to behave when they get the job versus just the interview.
Sure. Yeah, 100% agree.
But it's like forecast management. Every sales leader I talk to complains about the rep's ability to forecast. Well, yeah, it's part of their job, but they don't get comp. They get comped if it closes. That's what they care
Sure.
about. The manager should own the forecast and use it as a teaching tool to teach the reps about what's most likely going to happen next in this deal.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised actually, because sometimes when I speak to candidates that we're interviewing, sometimes, well, this is what I've been told, a lot of forecast meetings are more about, is the deal coming in? When is it coming in?
Well,
Nothing about how do we
where is
make
it
it
and what
happen? Yeah.
has to happen, right?
Yeah, and what support do you need, and how can we play a part in that in terms of team selling?
Right. But the most important thing the manager can do is help the reps see the holes in the deal. Right. If they're talking to
Yeah,
one person, if they think it's overly easy, it's only going to take a day. Do they understand what a purchase request is and who has to approve and what level of sign off is required? Those are the real treasures of the forecast review, as opposed to just flipping it back on the rep who says, oh, it's going to close last day of the month. Right.
yeah. Like with most Salesforce close dates, right, Brian?
They're all there, right? That's one busy day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, the art of it's forecasting, but also it's deal coaching at the same time. And
Yes.
the better you deal coach, the more accurate, believe it or not, I think you can forecast.
Yeah, definitely. Because they got to understand the full game of the deals. Because a lot of people give up on the game after the proposal is sent and they assume the customer knows how to get it done. But that's where it stalls.
Yeah, but that's almost like posting into a letterbox without an address. You don't know where it's going to go,
Oh,
right?
yeah, it's going to go maybe to their manager. That's about as far as it goes.
No, 100% agree. So yeah, I definitely I think that's a key part. And forecasting is a very interesting topic, and I believe, you know, most sales leaders should, to some extent, know the principles of how to forecast. Because if you can't, how do you make a commitment or call to the business, and then how does the business invest? So it's a very, very serious topic when you think about it.
Yes, because everyone kind of like just tries to pass it along and blame the other person, and but it should be a tool to really judge where deals are, to develop that skill of understanding.
Absolutely.
Well, what skill stack would you kind of recommend to new reps? Is it just slowing down, taking one step at a time, prioritization, learn to listen, learn not to get overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of everything you said. I would say like knowing what to prioritize, and making sure you've got that prioritized plan with your manager, with your coach, who's your key sponsor. Very interesting enough, maybe I can share, like we've been doing a lot of interviews at the moment with our growth, and I've flipped the process slightly where I would normally get involved in the panel, but I actually find myself doing a lot of the first of interviews to start with, because I put the accountability on me to make sure that I'm putting that candidate through to the manager that I think they would have the best fit with. Because I'm sure in your career, I've had it in mind, I've worked with some of the best managers in sales, but I've also worked with managers maybe not to that standard. So if you get that coach and rep relationship wrong, then it doesn't go anywhere either.
It's true. It kind of turns into this stalemate that, and the rep usually loses and everyone's unhappy.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say it's a combination of that and really getting to know your manager as well. But also I think it's really focusing on the key things. I think we get very caught up about revenue and the revenue game, but it's also equally important to make sure we're building the right competencies and the right habits into the areas that make revenue happen, such as pipeline building, such as speaking to the right people, the buyer personas. These things I think sometimes we overlook, and we just think more about getting the rep to a certain number. But then when they don't get to the number, when you unpack it, actually they've not even got the skills to even make
Right.
revenue happen, let alone hit their numbers.
Yeah. It'd be like go win that match without the
Yeah.
training and the practice and the repetition and the feedback to win that match.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we've also learned is, if you get that wrong and the rep's not able to be to some extent to that level of competency, then you run the risk of attrition, right?
You know,
Because no one wants to stay in a role that they're not happy with, and everybody wants to be successful. So there's been a lot of learnings there. And I think the pandemic has obviously shifted away a lot of companies. Like onboarding in person is maybe different to onboarding online. But
very
I
different.
would
Yeah.
say because of that, it's very important that you focus on the specifics and the details earlier on.
Cool. Hey, Alan, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
So LinkedIn, feel free to LinkedIn with me. Yeah, I would say that's probably the best way to reach me.